Susan Chekow-Lusignan, Director of Marketing and Program Development for the Friends and Foundation of the Rochester Public Library, and we welcome you to Book Sandwiched In. We ask that you please silence your cell phones at this time, which I'm realizing I did not do. Our thanks go to those who help fund programs like these through FFRPL, the dedicated FFRPL committee members who curate and organize these events, our guest speakers who so graciously share their time and talents with us, the library staff who help with our setup and production, and the thousands of people who attend each year. We are live streaming the formal portion of today's program to the library's YouTube channel at Rochester Public Library, New York. If you need to access the induction loop service in the auditorium, please adjust your hearing aid to the T switch. FFRPL raises funds, presents programs, supports special projects, helps to create specialized spaces, and purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the Rochester Public Library. We also manage restricted funds that provide supplemental materials support to 62 eligible libraries in Monroe, Ontario, Wayne, Livingston, Orleans, and Genesee counties. We raise funds through donations to an annual campaign, capital campaigns, grants, planned gifts, and revenue from book sales on site and online. We, of course, present programs like today's Book Sandwiched In review. We support special projects and exhibits like Central's signature Art of the Book and Paper show now on view across the street in the Rundell building. The reception is tomorrow night, Wednesday, September 17th from 5 to 7 p.m. The awards presentation will begin at 6, and FFRPL is a founding sponsor of that exhibit. We help to create specialized spaces such as RPL Go, RPL's new mobile library. FFRPL provided financial support for RIT students to create product prototypes for the vehicle and bought a set of laptops for that specialized space. And finally, FFRPL purchases supplemental materials and equipment for the library, including Empire Passes that patrons can borrow for free access to hundreds of New York State parks. And of course, our thanks go to our donors who make all of our work possible. Today, Scott Pukos will review Box Office Poison, Hollywood's Story in a Century of Flops by Tim Roby. In the introduction, Tim Roby asserts that the saga of archetypal flop has everything: escalating budgets, clashing egos, acts of God. Flops themselves can be such durably interesting artifacts. They're the medium's weirdos, outcasts, misfits, freaks. They can be reappropriated after the event as camp treats. They can linger as monuments to studio hubris, hobbled and crumbling, or they can electrify decades later for reasons of genuine artistry as misunderstood, radical, and ahead of their time. Scott Pukos is the Director of Communications for the Little Theater, a former award-winning newspaper reporter and television news producer. Scott currently works at the Little, where he talks about indie films, popcorn, and he hosts Movies and a Microphone, the Little's podcast. Please join me in welcoming Scott Pukos to our podium.
Thank you, everyone. As said in the intro, I'm Scott Pukos with the Little Theater. I can't tell you how excited I am to be up here doing this. Movies are my favorite thing, but also libraries are, specifically this library. I'm here pretty much every lunch break, so I was very excited to do this. And I do want the camera and you all to see my shirt, which is Defend Your Local Library, which we all have to be doing as well. And of course, it has a cat that looks like my cat as well. I have a loud voice, so this might happen. We might get some microphones squeaking. I'm curious, has anyone read this book? Has anyone read Box Office Poison? No, and that's good because I think if you're a movie person like I am, you will enjoy this. So kind of what I'm gonna do today is give you a taste of this book and hopefully convince you to want to read it as well. So I know you got a brief little description of it, but I really like what's on the book jacket, so I'm gonna read that for you as well. A riotous and revealing story of Hollywood's most spectacular flops and how they ended careers, bankrupt studios, and changed film history. From grand follies to misunderstood masterpieces, disastrous sequels to catastrophic literary adaptations, Box Office Poison tells a hugely engaging alternative history of Hollywood through a century of its most notable flops. What can these films tell us about the Hollywood system, the public's appetite, or lack of it, and the circumstances that saw such flops actually made? Away from the canon, this is the definitive take on these ill-fated but essential celluloid failures. From Daily Telegraph film critic Tim Roby, this is a brilliantly fun, piercingly witty exploration of the greatest film flops throughout history. I love Tim Roby's writing in this too, so I will be reading some segments of this so you kind of get a taste of his humor, the anecdotes in here, which I think are a big part of this story. So I think before I talk about the book a little, I do want to tell you some about myself and some about the Little Theater. So I'm going to tie these into my review of this book. Are we all familiar with the Little? I see some familiar faces. I see a lot of familiar faces. That's good. So the Little was established in 1929, October 17th, 1929. So our 96th birthday is coming up next month. It is the home for American independent, international, and classic films. But when the Little started on October 17th, the very first film was Cyrano de Bergerac, a silent film. We had a 3-person orchestra up in the balcony. And for a while, the Little showed strictly silent films and went by the moniker The House of Silent Shadows, which is, yes, that's the proper reaction. It's mysterious, it's alluring. We've used this in our marketing for our spooky season series. And for our 90th anniversary, we teamed up with Rohrbach and made a House of Silent Shadows Prohibition Porter. So it was a beer, we wanted to make a beer that was based on one of our most popular concession items. Now, of course, the most popular one is Little Popcorn, which many people say is the best popcorn in town. I tend to agree. But if you aren't familiar, making a beer with popcorn is not a great idea. Butter and beer don't mix, despite butterbeer being a thing. They don't mix. So we made our beer after the second most popular concession stand item, which is a Nanaimo bar. It's from a city in British Columbia called Nanaimo. It's a no-bake bar with chocolate, coconut, and then usually some sort of nut. We use almond for ours, so that's what we used in a beer. It was beer with chocolate, coconut, and almond. It was very delicious. Tasted like an Almond Joy. If you see cans of it around now, they're 5 years old, so do not drink it. But you can convince Rohrbach to perhaps bring it back. Aside from movies at the Little, we do have a cafe where we show live music. We have a different art exhibit every month. So the Little is where we have our main theater on East Avenue, and that was the one that opened in 1929. It was in the 1980s we turned an old tire shop into 2 more theaters, and then in the 90s added 2 more theaters in the cafe. So right now the Little is a total of 5 screens and a cafe as well. I hope we have a great lineup coming up, so I hope to see you at some of these movies. A couple series I want to touch upon, a few that are very near and dear to my heart. There was one that is not, I don't have it up on my slideshow, but I do want to mention it because it ties into another book recommendation. I read a book called Best Movie Year Ever, How 1999 Blew Up the Big Screen. Is anyone familiar with this? I don't know, maybe not, but you should check it out. I'm sure it's at this library. And it's all about how 1999 is the best movie year ever, which I tend to agree my all-time favorite movie is The Matrix, which is a film that really inspired my love for cinema. I snuck in when I was way too young to be seeing an R-rated movie and watched it, and it just kind of blew me away. So that's a 1999 film. Sixth Sense, Magnolia, Office Space, 10 Things I Hate About You, Eyes Wide Shut. In my opinion, it is the greatest movie year ever. So at the Little, we did a series in 2019 where we showed the 20th anniversary of all these films. And I really think the book gives such good anecdotes and really breaks down why 1999 was one of the best film years ever. Other series that we have at the Little, we have our Staff Picks series. So this is another one that I kind of led. And I like this because it's exactly what it sounds like. And I know, being book fans, you probably are familiar with the concept of staff picks in bookstores where different employees will have a little note about why they picked it. In old VHS stores, this was kind of my inspiration, how in like a Wegmans or Blockbuster, they'd have the VHS tapes and then staff having a little write-up on that. So it's a fun way just to speak with all my coworkers about what movies they want to see, and then letting them program either a hidden gem, a film that's their favorite, something they've never seen. So it's just kind of a fun thing that the community has really responded to as well. Other film series, we have Saturday Night Rewind, which is a throwback genre series. It started off as strictly a 35 millimeters series, so The Little is one of the few places in town, the Dryden Theater being the other, that shows 35 millimeter film. So most movies you see now in theaters are digital, and a lot of ours are still digital as well, but we try to show as much film as we can, at least one a month. We've shown newer films like Oppenheimer and Anora, which both won the Best Picture Oscar. We showed them in 35 millimeter film. So we still try to show that as often as possible. We have our spooky season series coming up in October. So if you're a fan of fall movies and horror movies, and sometimes cozy horror movies, we have a full lineup of that. We're showing Sinners. We're showing Return to Oz, so a real eclectic mix. And then this is, my next one on here is Dench After Dark, which started as a joke in a meeting. We're like, hey, we should show Judi Dench movies late at night. And then we actually ended up doing that. And I am mentioning that because this is going to come back later in the presentation, and one of the movies that is mentioned in Box Office Poison. So one more thing that I think makes me very happy that I'm able to do this was I feel I excelled at book reports when I was younger. I don't know. Hopefully my teachers would agree. But is anyone familiar with the Book It program? Did anyone do that? Or we have some Book It fans. Some people don't know what it is, and it's tough for me. But it was when I was in elementary school, and I believe they still do it. It was basically if you read a certain amount of books, you would have a punch card. I think it was like 5 or 6. You would get a free personal pan pizza at Pizza Hut, which for a young kid was the best tasting thing ever. That cheese personal pan pizza just hit so hard. I read so many Goosebumps books doing this. So at the Little, we were talking, I'm like, why don't we do that Book It, but for movies? So we started a few years ago, which we don't do anymore, unfortunately, the Pizza Popcorn Club, where it was a punch card. If you saw 6 movies, you would win a prize pack that had shirts and popcorn that we had pizza seasoning on, so pizza popcorn, which is very good. I don't know if everyone loved it quite as much as I did, but you're gonna have to trust me on that. Pizza seasoning on popcorn is a great move. All right, so a little on me. I'll try to be quick with this, but again, I'm the director of communications at the Little. I've worked for the Little now for 10 years, which is hard to believe. I started in 2015, and I feel from 2015 to 2020 seemed like a normal 5-year period. But then after 2020 to now, I think we can all relate. After 2020, we went into some time warp situation, and it just has gone by very quickly. But at any point, I've worked at the Little for 10 years. So if you have questions or anything on movies, feel free to send me an email. I run the social media for the Little, so feel free to slide into the DMs and ask some questions too. I was a former news reporter, a TV news producer as well, and I'm mentioning this because storytelling is big in that, and I think that's a lot of what we do at the Little. And I think with books like this and films, there's always a story to that. The history with the Little, there's a story. People have come and fallen in love at the Little, so we're always very interested in stories and the things that people create when they come to see the Little. These other things don't really have anything to do with the presentation, but I just think it's kind of cool. I used to be a hot air balloon chaser. Well, what is that? You can ask me afterward. It's very interesting. I have a cameo in a documentary about giant pumpkins called Lords of the Gourd, which my dad stars in and had a Netflix credit at one point. So if you can find that, we actually did a few free screenings at the Little of Lords of the Gourd. I pro-caper both the food and the shenanigan, and I'm mentioning this because I love a heist, which is kind of a form of a caper. I always joke about doing a heist, but for the record, since I'm on camera, I've not done a heist. I'm innocent. But I like a heist film, and I feel reading this book, and it talks a lot about kind of an inside baseball type thing on movies and how they're made and the process of getting them made, which reminded me a lot of a heist because it was an assembling of a team. You're coming up with these grand plans, and in some cases they pull it off perfectly and it's great. And a lot of cases, like in this book, things go horribly wrong and the plan does not go quite as they thought. And this next one is very, very important. I have a cat. Shout out to the great Catsby. Did I include a picture of her on the PowerPoint? I did. There she is. If you want to screenshot anything, this is that. And not later when I'm talking about cats, and you'll see why. The cat's the movie. Okay, so we're going to be talking about this book now. I was trying to think of articulate why this appeals to me. These are all movies that just bombed in spectacular ways, and some of them, it was just they thought they were cooking, and they were not. And I think we just all love something about a disaster, about things going wrong. I think there's just an appeal to that. Like, it's just as humans, we like to see things go wrong. That's just that. There's drama, there's behind-the-scenes messiness. You may be thinking, Scott, you've been mentioning Cats a lot. Is the movie Cats, starring Judi Dench, is that in there? It is. And here is the list of all the ones in here. So obviously I can't get to talk about all these in the presentation, but I'm going to read them off quickly because I think there's a lot of, this spans back to 1916 to 2019. So this is 100 years, this is a century of movies here. So Intolerance, Queen Kelly, Freaks, Sylvia Scarlett, The Magnificent Ambersons, Land of the Pharaohs, Dr. Dolittle, Sorcerer, Dune, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, Nothing But Trouble, The Hudsucker Proxy, Cutthroat Island, Speed 2, Cruise Control, Babe Pig in the City, so a lot of sequels, as you notice, Supernova, Rollerball, The Adventures of Pluto Nash, Geely, Alexander, Catwoman, A Sound of Thunder, Speed Racer, Citadoce, New York, Pan, and yes, Cats. Now, when I was telling people I was doing this presentation and reading this book, one of the first things that came up was like, oh, Heaven's Gate, that's in there too. That's one of the most infamous box office bombs. That is mentioned in here. There's not a chapter on it. I think Tim Roby, his explanation was that there has been a lot written on this, and he wanted to only do stuff that he was uncovering something new, adding a different perspective to the conversation, which Heaven's Gate has been written about a lot. Same with Ishtar. Waterworld is mentioned as well, which growing up, that was always thought of as a big flop in my mind. But it actually ended up making money, so it wasn't technically a box office bomb, even though it was quite disastrous. And then some newer ones like Babylon and Megalopolis are also come to my mind, although they're mentioned in here, but not actually, don't actually have a chapter. But what does have a chapter, there she is, Dame Judi Dench in Cats. So I mentioned Dench After Dark in our series, and we really wanted to show Cats for it and make it like a fun sing-along version where we encourage you to have a drink, a beverage, and sing along. Unfortunately, we could not get the rights to that. That is one of the problems we run into of working at a movie theater. You can't always get the rights to stuff. Sometimes stuff is too expensive. So we weren't able to show Cats again, although when it came out in December 2019, we did show Cats. So that is, for our biggest time of year is the fall and winter. So roughly like November to the Oscars, because that is when the Oscar movies come out. It's Oscar season. That's our big time of year. Like, we occasionally have a hit in the summer. Like, we showed Barbie and Oppenheimer. We had a year where the Mr. Rogers documentary and the RBG Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary came out in the same summer. Those were great popular summers, but mostly it's that Oscar season where people are coming to see a film. And in 2019, one of the films we had was Cats, which we kind of did encourage people to have more. I think, anecdotally, having people come to that, they weren't thinking like, this is a serious Oscar musical. This is going to be great. It was like, no, this is going to be a disaster. I can't look away. I have to see it. And there was a big controversy with Cats, and I'm going to read that part of the book, and I'm going to turn my slide, and you got to promise not to screenshot this, because this is not my words. This is a real thing. But the butthole cut was a big part of Cats. So yeah, don't screen that if you're watching YouTube. Don't get me with the butthole cut, because that is an actual thing, and I'm gonna read this little excerpt from it. So hopefully you don't know what I'm talking about, and you're like, what is he saying? But I'm gonna explain it here. The buttholes were a whole other story. First reported in March, the existence of a fabled butthole cut was confirmed online by various anonymous VFX staffers. Supposedly, the initial process of adding the fur created an unintentional byproduct, which was the cat's skin looked groomed or just folded in a way that really, really looked like furry lady genitals and buttholes by accident, per a crew member. One particular producer, it transpired, had been given the months-long job of combing through the film and removing one of the offending anuses. Upon these discoveries, hashtag release the butthole cut rapidly started trending and kept a large swath of the internet pacified during the early days of COVID. Cats wasn't just the butt of jokes anymore, but the butt of butt jokes. So that was another thing where it's just, you notice a trend when you read this book and if you've seen any of these movies, which by the way, has anyone seen Cats? I meant to ask that. Oh, yes. So you know, yeah, unfortunately, not the butthole cut, I'm sure. But yes, it's fun, and I think that's important to remember. Is just you can have fun with these movies, and that's what people did. They embraced that, and maybe the people working on Cats didn't embrace as much as I could see. You know, there's an element of embarrassment to that, but sometimes you just gotta embrace the fun. So this next one on here is kind of another notorious flop, and it's from an iconic director, which is another trend I noticed in this book and the movies featured, which was aside from just having some sequels, there are a lot of big-name directors, and David Lynch is one of them. He was coming off, he'd been nominated and won a few Oscars, so he had a choice of he could pick anything for his next project. He was offered the chance to direct Return of the Jedi, but turned it down. So in one of the timelines, in one world out there, we get David Lynch's version of what an Ewok looks like, which I'm very curious about. But for a long time, Dune was thought of as a book that just could not be translated to film. There's a lot of whispery inner monologues, and it's just a dense book. Has anyone read Dune? So yeah, you know, a lot of people have. Now, has anyone seen this movie, the 1984 version? Yes. It isn't, this one isn't the book. But so we recently played this at the Little. We are doing a series of Little Lynch, which is a tribute series to David Lynch. And I'm very happy that I was reading this book at the time because I had some very good anecdotes that I used for my film introduction when we played it that people seem to really like. Which I'm going to read the segment out of here, as I think it kind of shows off both the resourcefulness and it's kind of funny. So the producers, despite Dune being this epic, they wanted to make it cheap, which is, you can see why this probably failed, where Dune, it's something that you need a lot of special effects, but it led to some creativity and some resourcefulness that I really think helped make this movie a cult classic. So I'm going to read something regarding the pictured sandworm, and this is one of my favorite anecdotes in the entire book. Resourcefulness did sometimes win the day. Shimmering tendons inside the sandworms were created using thousands of condoms cut in half, then pasted together and moistened. This is a good line from David Lynch. What a manly movie, Lynch quipped when the order was placed. Which, side note, I think that's a very funny story to tell for whoever had condom duty that day. They're like, what'd you do working on that David Lynch movie? They have a dinner party story that is going to be, can't be beat for years. He might have saved that comment for the overhead shots of worms bursting out. There was frequent anxiety that these looked too phallic and that Universal might have, quote, the first X-rated science fiction film on its hands. To quote Raffaella De Laurentiis, after viewing the footage, every man in the room went home with a large inferiority complex. So I really appreciate the resourcefulness. And now, next time you watch Dune, you will be thinking about this when you see the sandworm, which I just love that as well. All right, so one of the movie that I really like, so I am a huge fan of 90s movies. They just speak to me in ways that a different decade, a different era of films do not. Speed is, I think, one of the best ones. One of my friends, shout out to Donnie, collects VHS tapes. So I recently got to watch the original Speed on VHS as it was intended, the original format. But like many 90s action films, when you have a hit, there was a demand, there's a necessity. We need a sequel. Speed 2 Cruise Control, which came out in 1997, many could say that does not need to exist, yet here we are, it does exist. they could not get Keanu Reeves. He, in a very smart move, said, I will not be doing this. Jason Patrick ended up taking his spot. So the book had a very interesting thing on rejected ideas for Speed 2, which some of these I think I would be on board for. So you can see them up here on the screen. There was one where a warship carrying ammo might explode if it gets wet. So that'd be Speed 2 warship. I'd watch that. There was one where a plane had to fly through the Andes Mountains without ever exceeding 10,000 feet in altitude, which again, I think that would be very good. But the director of Speed and Speed 2 had a dream, an actual dream, where there was a boat involved, and his dream had a boat like crashing into something. He's like, that's the movie. So he basically, that was the end of the movie, and then kind of reverse engineered everything from there. But as you might be thinking, speed from the name, and of course the plot in the original movie was the bus could not go under 55 miles per hour, so you had to keep it going. The big problem with Speed 2, and I'm going to read this excerpt here, is that there was not a lot of speed. There was really no excuse. Oh wait, no, that's for everyone else. It is and was pretty much a wholesale disaster. Speed, let's address the basics, had speed. That bus couldn't get below 50 miles per hour. I said 55, that was incorrect. Or it would blow up. Seaborn Legend, which is the boat in Speed 2, at full tilt gets up to 19 knots, which is roughly 20 miles per hour. So for 90% of its running time, Speed 2 is stuck on a huge boat that might as well be obeying the traffic laws outside a kindergarten. Cruise control, one wonders if someone at Fox got a promotion for that pun. Right, it's a cruise that someone is controlling. Cruise control. Might anyone have dared point out that license to take your foot off the accelerator and just kick back doesn't sound very James Bond? Sandra Bullock would have killed for cruise control on that bus. Just ask her, the veteran of both flicks, for her opinion of this one. Slow boat, slowly going toward an island. It's one of only 2 films she's vocally embarrassed to have appeared in across her whole career. The other being Miss Congeniality 2, Armed and Fabulous. I've done 2 sequels. They were horrible. I'll never do a sequel again, she confirmed at the premiere of The Heat in 2013. Has anyone seen Speed 2 Cruise Control, by the way? Long ago, yeah, me too. I don't remember much, so that's like reading it. I watched it very young, so I don't think I put together that it's like, oh yeah, this doesn't exactly work. This is not exciting. This boat is just going way too slow. Okay, so we're going to have a few more, but before we get to that, there is a segment where you're going to be asking questions of me, but I wanted to ask you guys all a question. Are there any box office bombs that you all either think of when you think of like a big disaster, or anyone that you hold very close to your heart? And part of why I asked that is because, as was mentioned in the intro, I host a podcast for The Little, and one of my favorite segments that we are planning to do is where people defend a movie. So it's a movie, much like the ones in this book, where everyone thinks of as not being a good movie at all, but you defend it. It's someone that you hold dear to your heart. So does anyone here, and you can raise your hand and I'll repeat it into the mic so everyone can hear, but is there anyone here that has a box office bomb or a disaster movie that they love? Yeah, go ahead. Congo, oh, based on a Michael Crichton book. So Congo was the one, yeah. Okay, I like that one. I think I read the book, but I have not seen the movie. Yeah, go ahead. All right, he said all the Fast and Furious movies, if everyone did not hear. I've only seen the first 2, I think, which I... Any other ones? Yeah, go ahead. Oh, Brimstone and Trackle. Okay, I don't even think I'm familiar with that one. No. All right. A literal unforgettable movie. Okay, I love that. Yeah, 80s is good. It's not 90s, but 80s is solid. So yeah, if anyone has Letterboxd, where here's some good movie suggestions for you. So I don't know how much time we have. It looks like we're running a little low, so I'm going to kind of get through these quickly. But one that I really think of when I think of box office bombs is Geely, which, first of all, when you make a movie that is difficult to pronounce, when it came out, people were like, is it Giggly? It's not Giggly. Maybe it should have been. That maybe would have been better. It's Geely. Of course, the big thing around it was Bennifer, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, which maybe was one of the first instances of a celebrity name being combined. I don't think actually touches upon that in the book. I don't think it's the first time that these two celebrity names were combined, but it was kind of one of the more popular ones. But it was just problematic and tough right from the start, and it never really hit. So I was going to read a little section on that, but actually, no, I'm still going to read it, actually. It's a pretty good one. So this does have some swearing and slurring that I'm not going to say. So when I say swear, that's not what it says in the book, which I think you could put together. But then there's the question of Ricky's sexuality. That's Jennifer Lopez's character. She's a lesbian, in fact, elated in the trailer and marketing. In one especially toxic monologue, the thwarted, unlovable Larry moans to her face that she's a stone-cold slur, a swear word, untouchable, unhavable, untainable, brick wall, swearing, slur, Asaurus Rexy. Followers of Affleck's career as a leading man might wonder for how long this Slurrosaurus remains one, especially if they've seen Kevin Smith's Chasing Amy, in which his character single-handedly converts the lesbian played by Joey Lauren Adams into someone who prefers sex with men. And yet, before we know it, J-Lo's Ricky is an untouchable, unhavable, untainable brick wall whom Larry has managed to touch, have, and indeed attain. Is there no lesbian on Earth, on movie Earth, who wouldn't, quote, hop the fence, his phrase, for a vigorous Afflecking? I like the phrase Afflecking. That's why I was like, I have to read that one afterward. So a lot of the films that I've touched upon in the presentation were all somewhat newer within the past 20 years or so. But this, again, goes back into 1916. And so the very first chapter is D.W. Griffith's Intolerance. So this was a follow-up to 1915's Birth of a Nation, which was, at the time, the Titanic of its time. It was the first movie to be screened for Supreme Court and the White House. And it's also hugely problematic. It fueled the revival of the KKK. It's a movie that now is shown as an example of a film that is racist and not what you'd want to do. But at the time, it was one of the biggest films. And so D.W. Griffith, he wanted to go bigger, which I think that hubris is a lot of directors in this, where they just think they can do it in cases where maybe they should not have that confidence. So the budget, the runtime, they're all out of control. This made less than $1 million at the box office. And for comparison, at the time, Birth of a Nation made more than 20. So I have a very quick segment that I'm going to read from that, kind of talking about the grand scale of this all. Even at this stage, Griffith was optimistic about his picture's chances. Thanks to royalties from Birth, he was swimming in money. His income that year was a whopping $250,431. Unlike Charlie Chaplin, Mary Pickford, or Douglas Fairbanks, who were careful about saving their personal fortunes, he was cavalier about spending his. He had the finest suits tailored and swanned around in expensive cars. Plus, he had no compunction in bankrolling every last cent of overtime on Intolerance personally. Convinced that his own genius was the origin of these rewards, he reinvested his fortune ecstatically in himself. The rough cut of Intolerance ran for a bewildering 8 hours. I would not watch it. I love movies. 8 hours is a little long, which Griffith originally wanted to show in 2 4-hour sittings. Exhibitors who were gaining power to decide what they could or could not program balked at the proposal. Fielding their complaints was Griffith's first external setback in the 20 months he had taken putting the film together. On their advice, he cut it back to under 3 hours, tearing away swaths of subplots, especially in the French section. So the movie ended up not being very coherent because he cut down a bit. There was a famous quote from Roger Ebert that a good movie can't be too long, but a bad movie can't be too short. That might not be the exact quote, but I think you get the idea that I've sat through 90-minute movies that seem so long, and then a 3-hour movie that just flies by. So it really depends on the quality, but I will say 8 hours is too long for a film. So one of the takeaways I had from this that I mentioned was there's a lot of big name stars and directors in here. So aside from David Lynch, there was Charlie Kaufman, who again has written two of my favorite movies, which is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, it being John Malkovich. He was in here for Synecdoche, New York. The Wachowski sisters, who again directed The Matrix, are in here for Speed Racer. Coen brothers are in here. Babe is in here. Babe the Pig, we love Babe, but Babe and the Pig in the Big City, which I did not realize was a flop. Halle Berry was also a big star in this, and she was coming off an Oscar and then was in Catwoman. So I'm not a big fan of the Razzies. I always think I don't like rewarding. So the Razzies, if you don't know, it's awards that are right before the Oscars, and they award worst movie of the year, worst actor, which I don't really appreciate. I think that's kind of that doesn't really help in any ways. But Halle Berry had a really good reaction to that, which I'm going to read here quickly. The one silver lining in this whole debacle was Berry showing up at the Razzies to collect Worst Actress. Catwoman won Worst Film too, of course. Talk about spitting gold from straw. Berry holding her Monsters Ball Oscar aloft in one hand and the freshly engraved golden raspberry in the other, found the one way to make such an appearance funny, which is to fall gush and fake cry exactly as if you're receiving the industry's highest accolade. It was a rare instance of that ceremony being worth watching. She had many, many people to thank. No one earns a Razzie single-handedly. She warmly praised Pitoff, who was the director of Catwoman, while admitting she could never understand a world she said, never understand a word he said, the director said. She was above all in Warner Brothers' debt for doing her the huge honor of putting her, quote, in a piece of swear, god-awful movie. It was exactly what my career needed. I was at the top, and Catwoman just plummeted me to the bottom. All right, so final thoughts. Hopefully I convinced you, if you're a movie fan, if you're a fan of kind of some drama and intrigue, to check this book out. Tim Roby's writing I really appreciate a lot. So that's Box Office Poison. I'm sure it's at the library. Do we have time for questions, or we do the raffle time? Yes, if you have any questions, we could do that, and then we're going to raffle off a copy of the book.